Hello and welcome to the newsroom. I'm Thomas Porteous, and today has been a significant day when it comes to the likes of Middle East diplomacy and the Russia war in Ukraine, among many other updates. It's been a very busy day today. We start with the ongoing tensions between Iran and the United States. We have seen, of course, a huge development today when a third round of nuclear talks have been confirmed for Thursday, February the 26th in Geneva via Omani mediation once again. A change in location from prior talks, this time occurring in the Swiss capital, often seen as a place of neutrality, but they will still be mediated by the Omanis. There are multiple talking points when it comes to these negotiations, of course. The United States and Iran on very, very different pages, but we are getting limited information coming out of the talks directly. They're preferring to keep the information away from the press in order to stop any disruptions coming to them. But high-level talks, two very differing signs, and we'll of course be bringing you viewers all of the updates that we can get our hands on. Joining us now to give us more on this is my colleague Ayanaba Banerjee. Ayanaba, we talk of two separate pages when it comes to these talks. Going into them, coming up on Thursday, which has now been confirmed, what are those two pages? What do they say? What are the disagreements? What more can you tell us?
Thank you, Thomas. Now we finally have a confirmation on the next round of talks when it comes to the Iran and US negotiations. The talks, like you mentioned, will take place in Geneva on 26th of February. Now it's very important to note that the region of the talks have been changed from Oman to now Geneva. Earlier, the talks were taking place in Oman, so as to think of it as a continuation of the previous year's US-Iran talks that were taking place in June of 2025. But now suddenly we see that there has been a change in location. Some more details that are coming out is the fact that New Iran has been constantly stating that they will not back down when it comes to nuclear enrichment, uranium enrichment. Iran has multiple times stated that they might put a cap on the enrichment limit, but they would not stop nuclear enrichment. Now, previously we were getting reports which stated that US had reportedly agreed to the fact that Iran can keep on enriching uranium, but to a certain extent. But recently, in the last 24 hours, we have heard from US officials stating that such reports are misleading because none of the agreements have been agreed upon, none of the pointers have been agreed upon so far. Also, very interestingly, Thomas, it's very important to note the fact that protests have erupted in Iran once again. This time, the protests are taking place in the university campuses in Tehran and in different parts of Iran. It's very important to know this fact because during the protests that started in the end of 2025, it was during those protests that US President Trump started threatening Iran with a military retaliation. US President stated that if the Iranian government, if the Iranian regime does not stop targeting the protesters, it might consider a military action against Iran. So those comments were exchanged, those statements were made, the protests died down, Iran came back to the negotiating table. But right now we can again see that the protests are taking place, protests are escalating. So let's just keep a track of this protest, and only time will tell if these protests and if this protest can garner another reaction from the US president. Back to you, Thomas.
Indeed. Of course, those two sides remain on very different pages, Ayanaba. What more can you tell us about the trust between the two countries? We have seen negotiations between the United States and Iran before. However, this was back in 2025, last year, and then they were brought to a halt by that Israeli-launched war, the 12-day war, as it is also called. What further can you tell us about both the trust deficit between the two sides, what both sides want out of these talks at the end?
It's a very important point that you highlighted, Thomas. So if we go back into the history, around 1953, when the Shah regime was established, it was a CIA-backed regime which garnered protests because, according to the Iranian people, it was a dictatorial regime. Later on, around 1960s and 70s, the Islamic Revolution took place, which dethroned the Shah regime, and in turn, the Shah went to US to seek refuge. And it's since then that the trust between Iran and US have been deteriorating. Back in the early 2010, during Obama's regime, a JCPOA was established between Iran and US, which basically put forward some agreements regarding Iran's nuclear enrichment. But when Trump took power in 2018, he withdrew from that particular agreement and put more sanctions on Iran. And now coming back to 2025, like you had mentioned earlier, Iran and US were back on the negotiating table in June of 2025, but we all know what happened after that. After 5 rounds of nuclear talks, US conducted Operation Midnight Hammer, under which it struck 3 nuclear facilities in Iran, post which Iran entered a 12-day war with Israel, which led to a lot of casualties in the Iranian side. Back to you, Thomas.
Ayanaba, thank you so much for bringing us that context. Do stay with us as we turn to another major development and we move over to North America next. And within the past 24 hours, the cartel boss, as some call him, El Mencho, was killed by Mexican forces in an operation that sought to arrest him, but ended with his death. He died of his injuries on his route to a nearby hospital. This has caused ripple effects through the country, which is hugely cartel influenced. Of course, we have now seen violence within Mexico, with plumes of smoke going above some of the Mexican provinces. El Mencho, the leader of this hugely influential Jalisco New Generation cartel in Mexico, one of the hemisphere's most powerful criminal networks, has been killed, and we are now seeing the fallout of that throughout the country. Ayanaba joins us once again to give us further insight on the situation coming out of Mexico. Ayanaba, what has happened since El Mencho's death?
Yes, since El Mencho's death, we have seen a rise in violence, arson in the western part of Mexico, which has been considered to be a stronghold for the Jalisco New Generation cartel, the cartel whose boss was killed in an operation during 22nd of February. Now, it's also very important to understand how and why this particular region was impacted by this. So basically, this particular drug cartel, it worked around the region of western and southwestern Mexico. It used to traffic drugs such as fentanyl, cocaine, heroin into the United States, and because of its impact, there was a huge bounty on El Mancho's head. The US administration had established a bounty of $15 million on El Mancho. It was one of the largest sum that has been put on any drug cartel's head, drug cartel leader's head so far. And when we are talking about the operation, it's also very important that we delve into the details of the operation that took place on 22nd of February. So during that operation, first of all, the operation was a joint operation between the Mexican Army, the Mexican Air Force, and the National Guards of that particular area. All of these groups together, they attacked a local town called Tapalpa, which is in Jalisco state, Jalisco, which is again southwest to Guadalajara. During that operation, 4 members of El Mancho's drug cartel were killed instantly. El Mancho and 1 or 2 of his team members were seriously injured, and like you had mentioned earlier, El Mancho was then being airlifted by a helicopter to a hospital in New Mexico, and during that journey he succumbed to his injuries. Now, like we have discussed earlier, this death led to violence, a rise in violence in the western part of Mexico. Guadalajara state saw a rise in arson attacks. The shops were closed. All of the local public, the citizens, they were urged to stay inside. They were asked not to get out of the house until and unless it was an important work. And within hours, Mexican President Sheinbaum then addressed the media, went through the details of the operation, and also highlighted the fact that the operation was carried independently by the Mexican forces, because it's a very important statement that was made by Sheinbaum, because earlier US President Trump had also chimed in. So what we know so far, what has Sheinbaum confirmed so far, is the fact that US was also involved in the operation, in the sense that US provided some intelligence when it came to the operation, but there were no US forces that were involved in the operation. Back to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Ian Nabber, for joining us. Of course, we're going to keep tabs on that situation in Mexico as investigations continue and violence continues to flare up. We now move on, and today marks the eve of the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia back in 2022. A significant diplomatic development today, where the EU has launched a vote wanting new sanctions. However, a twist in the road, 2 EU member states out of the 27 member bloc are blocking the 20th sanctions package because of an oil transit dispute. Both EU members Hungary and Slovakia are blocking the European Union's package, holding out over issues tied to Russian oil pipeline deliveries. Hungary has also vetoed a $90 billion EU aid loan plan for Ukraine, until its energy concerns are addressed. The European Commission has publicly rebuked both the Slovakian and the Hungarian government and urged them to uphold prior pledges on sanctions and Ukraine support. This has blocked sanctions, including restrictions on maritime services for Russian oil and shadow fleet measures. Ayanaba joins us once more to give us a little bit more on the updates coming out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict today.
Thank you, Thomas. Like you have very rightly mentioned that this is the eve of the anniversary of the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, which started on 24th of February 2022. Unfortunately, Thomas, what we see right now is a divided European Union Parliament. Slovakia and Hungary recently vetoed the 20th sanction package on Russia. The sanction package which was supposed to put $90 million euro sanction on Russia. Both the East European nations blocked the package. Now I'll tell you why that happened. Primarily, the reason that is being cited by Hungary and Slovakia is quote unquote Ukraine's energy blackmail. Now, what do they mean by it? So there was this pipeline called the Druzhba oil pipeline, which was struck by Russian Russian strikes, which used to transfer oil through Ukraine into these nations. Now, according to both Slovakia and Hungary, this particular pipeline has not been repaired by Ukraine, due to which less of oil is coming into Hungary and Slovakia, leading to energy crises. Now, Hungary and Slovakia claim that the reason why Ukraine is not repairing the pipeline is so that these two nations can be blackmailed into supporting Ukraine. Now it's just a war of words between Hungary, Slovakia and Ukraine. Another important factor is the fact that Hungary and Slovakia also feel that these sanction packages, instead of hampering Russia's economy, it ends up affecting Europe's economy. Also, it's very important to point out that this division did not happen today. There is a history behind these divisions, and I would like to read out some points to you from my phone. So, these divisions have been caused by a variety of factors. The one important reason for the division between the European Union and Slovakia is Slovakia's legal overhaul. Under Robert Fico, Slovakia recently abolished its Special Prosecutor's Office, which handled high-level corruption charges, and the Whistleblower Protection Office as well. So, the EU, the European Union, views these as direct attacks on the justice system, leading to the launch of an infringement proceedings in late 2025. Coming to Hungary, Hungary's sovereignty laws have been under attack according to the European Union. Hungary continues to face the Article 7 procedure and recent tensions involving foreign influence laws and the use of AI in political campaigns, which the European Union claims are being used to silence the opposition. Another very important factor just to think about is the fact that both Hungary and Slovakia have leaders who are right-leaning, and they have found their support in the Republican-led administration in Washington, and they feel even if they are not with the European Union or they don't have the support of European Union, they will still have the support of US President Trump and the Republican administration that is currently presiding over Washington. Back to you, Thomas.
Ainaba, thank you so much for bringing us those updates and broader context to those developments. We finish off this hour in the United States, where it's been around 48 hours since we've received that Supreme Court ruling that Donald Trump's sweeping tariff policy, his staple economic policy of his second term, are unconstitutional. We have had comments coming in throughout the day from President Donald Trump slamming both the judges and the decision, mainly coming out on Truth Social. Of course, there are statements coming from across the globe following this development, as clarity remains uncertain after this rejection of his earlier tariff scheme. Trump is escalating these trade duties, following from initially putting it down at 10% and then enhancing it to 15%. Now, countries have responded to this, like the European Union and others, saying that a deal is a deal. Those who have already signed trade deals, the United States is expected to keep their end of the bargain, as the other party was expected to keep those when they were initially signed. Trump has slammed this court ruling on social media, calling it deeply disappointing and attacking these justices, most of whom were seen as conservative leading. Only 3 Supreme Court judges remain who have been appointed by Democrat presidents. 3 of the justices on the Supreme Court were even appointed by Trump himself. Both Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch, both Trump appointees, actually voted against the US President Donald Trump's ruling. Markets have reacted with global stock indices falling on tariff fears and uncertainty. So there certainly is a feeling of confusion surrounding what is going to happen next when it comes to Donald Trump's economic policy. But we sure have not seen the end to this developing situation, whether Donald Trump is going to find a way around this or have to even go so far as to refund all the money he has collated through the imposition of these tariffs. But we'll of course be following it here on the channel as days tick on into Donald Trump's second and ever evolving second presidency. But that is all that we have time for today. Keep updated here on NewsX World as we continue to bring you the most pressing international updates. Thank you very much for joining us.